You see, I'd spent years trying to build a family, a home. My son, the one I raised with so much care, was getting married. I thought everything was falling into place. His fiancée was sweet and kind, and I genuinely liked her. But when I walked in on them one day, I found something I never imagined. My husband, the man I had been with for over 30 years, was holding her hand. No, it wasn't just holding her hand. It was something far more intimate. And in that moment, I felt like the earth had opened beneath my feet. How could this happen? How could my own husband betray me like this, with my son's fiancée no less? I stood there frozen, the room spinning around me. I wanted to scream, to confront them both, but I couldn't find my voice. I was in shock. The world I thought I knew, the one I built with love, was crumbling right in front of me. And my daughter-in-law is telling me to leave? That was the final blow. But even then I smiled. It was all I could do to hold back the tears. I grew up in a small town, where everyone knew everyone's business, and it was impossible to keep secrets. It was a simple life, one that came with its own set of challenges but also a lot of joy. I married young, thinking it was the right thing to do, just like all the women around me. We didn't have much, but we had each other. My husband, James, was a hard-working man. He wasn't perfect, but he was kind and steady and always made sure we had what we needed. Our home was small, but it was filled with love. And when we had our son, Aaron, it felt like our family was complete. I watched him grow up. He was always such a thoughtful child, sensitive to the feelings of others, always looking out for his friends, and even at a young age, showing signs of being a protective big brother to his little sister Emma. Our life, as simple as it was, it felt like a beautiful dream. But, of course, life has a way of throwing curveballs when you least expect it. Aaron grew up, and just like every parent, I hoped he'd find someone who would make him happy. And he did. Her name was Rachel. She was everything I had hoped for: kind, well-spoken, and respectful. She had a warmth to her that reminded me of the summer days we'd spent together as a family. I thought it was too good to be true. How could anyone not love Rachel? She had this way of making people feel like they were the most important person in the room. When Aaron introduced her to the family, I saw it right away. This was the woman he was going to marry. I was happy, but there was a part of me that was wary too. It wasn't anything I could put my finger on. Maybe it was the way she was always so eager to please, the way she'd go out of her way to show kindness. But then again, I thought maybe I was just overthinking things. After all, a mother's instinct is always sharper when it comes to the people in their children's lives, right? The wedding was planned quickly. I didn't mind. I'd always dreamed of the day Aaron would find the woman he'd spend the rest of his life with. I put my worries aside and focused on the joy of the occasion. Rachel was a lovely bride, and as we stood there watching her walk down the aisle, I couldn't help but feel a sense of pride. Aaron looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. I didn't know then how much that would change, how much everything would change. But that's how life is, isn't it? Changes when you least expect it. As the months passed after the wedding, I did my best to welcome Rachel into our family. She wasn't just my son's wife. She was now my daughter in a sense. I wanted to make her feel comfortable, to be the mother-in-law she could rely on. We had Sunday dinners at our house, and she would often visit with Aaron, bringing little surprises like desserts or flowers. It seemed like we were all getting along well, and I felt that familiar warmth filling the house again. But as time went on, I began to notice subtle shifts. It was the small things at first, the way Rachel would give me a forced smile when we spoke like she was trying too hard to fit in. The way she'd make little comments that seemed to distance herself from me. "I'm sure Aaron would prefer if we did things our way, you know?" she'd say, making it clear that she wanted her own space, her own rules. I thought it was just a phase that newlyweds sometimes feel like they need to carve out their own life. But still, there was something unsettling about the way she started to distance herself. It wasn't just Rachel. My relationship with James was also beginning to feel strained. I don't know when it started or what caused it, but there were fewer moments of closeness between us. He'd come home from work, tired and distant, and I'd try to make conversation, but he'd brush me off or give me one-word answers. The affection that once filled our home had quietly slipped away. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself that it was just a phase, that the years of marriage had dulled the excitement a little, but there was a hollow feeling inside me every time I looked at him. I missed the man I used to know, the man who would surprise me with flowers or call me during the day just to check in. The man who held my hand whenever we went out for walks. That man felt like a distant memory, and I didn't know how to bring him back. And then came the day when Aaron and Rachel invited us over for dinner. It wasn't anything special, just a casual evening. We arrived a little early, as we usually did, and when the door opened, Rachel greeted us with that same forced smile. She wasn't the bubbly girl I had met on the wedding day, but I pushed those thoughts aside. I told myself I was being overly sensitive. As the evening went on, I noticed that James seemed unusually quiet, retreating into himself more than usual. His eyes would wander when I spoke to him, and every time I tried to touch his arm or ask him something, he would pull away. I wondered if it was because of the tension with Rachel or if there was something else going on, but I never thought to question it. Not yet. A few weeks later, things started to get more complicated. James became even more distant. At first, I tried to chalk it up to work stress, but it was starting to feel like more than that. He was becoming increasingly irritable at home, and whenever I asked him what was wrong, he'd brush it off, saying, "It's nothing." But I could see it, the frustration in his eyes, the tightness in his jaw, the way he avoided looking at me. One evening, while we were having dinner, I noticed something strange. James was checking his phone more often, something he rarely did. At first, I thought maybe it was just work, but I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to it. I tried to ignore it, but it became harder each day. I found myself questioning him more, asking where he'd been, why he was always on his phone, and why he couldn't look at me the way he used to. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but I couldn't help it. Something felt off. Then came the day that changed everything. I had planned to visit Aaron and Rachel's house, and I decided to go earlier than planned. I had some food in hand, something I thought they'd enjoy. But when I arrived, the door was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and stepped inside, thinking maybe they hadn't heard me knock. But the scene that greeted me was one I'll never forget. James was there, in their living room, sitting very close to Rachel. He had his hand on her knee. At first, I thought I was imagining things, but the longer I stood there, the more I realized this wasn't an accident. They were too comfortable, too familiar with each other. And I knew without a doubt that something was wrong. Something was happening between them, something I hadn't seen coming. My heart dropped to my stomach, and my legs felt like they would give way beneath me. I wanted to say something, but I couldn't find my voice. I felt like the walls were closing in around me, and everything I thought I knew about my family and my marriage was unraveling right before my eyes. I turned around and left without a word. I couldn't bring myself to face either of them, not then. I needed time. Time to process, time to understand what I had just seen. But deep down, I knew that my world had just shifted. It wasn't just about Rachel anymore. It wasn't just about James. It was about everything, the trust, the love, the years of commitment. It was all shattered in an instant. The days after that moment felt like a blur. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had seen. The image of James and Rachel together haunted me, replaying over and over in my mind. I told myself it wasn't true, that maybe I had misinterpreted the situation, that maybe there was an innocent explanation. But deep down, I knew that wasn't the case. Something was happening between them, something I wasn't part of, and it was tearing me apart. I tried to keep up appearances. I went through the motions, smiling at family gatherings, cooking dinner, and doing the things I've always done. But everything felt hollow, like I was pretending to be someone I wasn't. Every time I looked at James, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. He'd still come home from work, but the distance between us grew wider with each passing day. It wasn't just the silence. It was the coldness, the emotional barrier he had put up that I couldn't break through. I tried talking to him, but the more I spoke, the more he shut me out. "I'm just tired, that's all," he would say, brushing off my concerns with a wave of his hand. But I knew there was more to it. I could feel it. His behavior had changed, and I was no longer the woman he came home to. I couldn't help but feel rejected, abandoned, as though I was no longer the one he wanted to be with. I began to notice the little things, the late nights at work, the frequent phone calls, and the way he would smile when Rachel's name came up in conversation. It wasn't much, but it was enough to make my heart ache. I wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, but every time I thought about it, I hesitated. What if I was wrong? What if I was overreacting? I didn't want to make a fool of myself, but the doubt gnawed at me, growing stronger with each passing day. It wasn't just James that I was questioning. It was Rachel too. How could she be involved in this? She was supposed to be a part of our family. She was supposed to be someone I could trust. But now, every time I look at her, I can't help but wonder if she was playing me all along. Was she really the sweet, kind woman I thought she was? Or was she something else entirely? I couldn't shake the feeling that she had been hiding her true intentions from me. That maybe she was just pretending to be innocent, while secretly tearing my family apart. I couldn't let go of the image of them together. And I couldn't stop asking myself how long it had been going on. How long had this betrayal been simmering beneath the surface, right under my nose? As the days went by, I became more and more consumed by my thoughts. I couldn't stop wondering if this was the beginning of the end for my family. The weight of the situation felt unbearable, but I couldn't bring myself to confront either of them. I kept telling myself that I needed to gather more proof, that I couldn't accuse them without knowing for sure. But the truth was I was scared. Scared of what I might find. Scared of what it might mean for my marriage, for my son's relationship, for everything I had known. It wasn't just the secrets that were bothering me, it was the lies. The lies that James had been telling me all along. The late nights at work, the unexplained absences, the phone calls that he would quickly hide when I entered the room. It was all adding up, but I didn't want to face it. I didn't want to accept the reality that my husband, the man I had built my life with, might not be the person I thought he was. One evening after dinner, I decided to take a different approach. I wasn't going to confront him outright. Instead, I decided to pay attention, to watch him closely, to see if I could catch him in a lie. I noticed the small things, the way he would check his phone every few minutes and the way he would glance at it quickly when I walked into the room, as though he was hiding something. I started to wonder if I had been blind all these years. Was I so wrapped up in my own world that I hadn't noticed the cracks forming beneath the surface? But I still couldn't bring myself to ask him directly. I thought about it. Oh, how I thought about it, but the words wouldn't come. The fear of the truth paralyzed me. What if I was wrong? What if it was all in my head? The last thing I wanted was to lose everything, my marriage, my family. And yet, every time I looked at James, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was hiding something from me. I knew I wasn't imagining it. And then there was Rachel. Her visits became less frequent, but when she did come around, it was always with that same forced smile, that same overly polite tone. It felt like she was pretending to be someone she wasn't, as though she was playing a part in some twisted drama that I didn't understand. She had always been so sweet, so eager to please, but now she seemed more distant, more guarded. I couldn't help but wonder if she knew I was onto her, if she could sense that I was starting to see through the act. Every time I looked at her, I saw the same questions reflected in her eyes. Had she always been this way? Or was she changing too, just like everything else in my life? One afternoon, a few days after I had caught a glimpse of James and Rachel together, I found myself standing in front of the mirror, staring at my reflection. I looked tired. My face had lost its usual brightness, replaced by a dullness I couldn't ignore. I could feel the weight of my thoughts pressing down on me, but still I couldn't bring myself to act. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I knew I couldn't keep living like this, like everything was normal when it wasn't. That's when the phone call came. It was Rachel, asking if I could stop by to help her with some decorating she was doing at their house. She said Aaron would be out, and that it would just be the two of us. At first I hesitated, wondering if this was a trap, a way for her to try to smooth things over with me. But I couldn't say no. There was something about her voice, something that made me feel like I had to at least try to understand what was going on. So I told myself I'd go, even though every part of me was telling me to stay away. When I arrived, I noticed right away that the house felt different. It was quieter than usual and Rachel seemed tense. She welcomed me with that same forced smile, but there was something else behind it. I couldn't quite place it, but it made me feel uneasy. Still, I pushed those feelings aside and followed her inside. We spent the next hour working in silence. The awkwardness between us was palpable. I could sense that Rachel was trying to make small talk, but it all felt rehearsed, as if she was trying too hard to act normal. I caught her glancing at me several times, her eyes betraying a hint of guilt. But every time I met her gaze, she quickly looked away, like she was afraid I would see right through her. Finally, as I was packing up to leave, I couldn't hold it in any longer. "Rachel," I said, my voice trembling, "is there something you need to tell me?" She froze, caught off guard. For a long moment she said nothing. I could see the wheels turning in her head, and I knew she was weighing her options, whether to confess or keep pretending. Finally she spoke, but it wasn't the answer I expected. "I think you already know," she said softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sorry, but I don't know how to explain everything." Her words hit me like a ton of bricks. I didn't want to hear it, I didn't want to accept what she was saying. But I could see the truth in her eyes, even if she wasn't saying it outright. I felt a surge of anger mixed with sorrow, and for the first time I found my voice. "How long?" I asked, barely able to choke the words out. Rachel's face crumpled as she answered. "It started a few months ago. It wasn't planned, it just happened. I never meant to hurt you." I stood there, completely stunned. A part of me wanted to scream, to demand answers, but another part of me felt like I was watching my world collapse in slow motion. My heart ached with the realization that everything I had believed in was a lie. The trust one had placed in both of them had been shattered, and nothing would ever be the same again. The weight of Rachel's confession hung in the air, suffocating me. I wanted to shout, to ask her how she could do this, but the words wouldn't come. I stood there, frozen, as if the ground beneath me had shifted. Every part of my being wanted to run, to escape from the suffocating reality that was closing in on me. But I didn't move. I couldn't. "Why?" I finally managed to ask, my voice barely audible. "Why my husband? Why James?" Rachel's eyes filled with tears, and she took a step closer to me. "I never meant for it to happen," she said, her voice shaking. "It was never about you. It was just something that grew between us. Something I didn't expect, and certainly something I never wanted. I didn't know how to stop it." "Please don't," Rachel pleaded. "It's not just about you. It's not that simple." But it was simple. It was simple because I had been living a lie for so long, and now the truth was staring me in the face. I had to confront James. I had to face the man I thought I knew and figure out how to put the broken pieces of my life back together. Or maybe, just maybe, I had to accept that there was no fixing it. The drive back to our house was the longest I had ever experienced. The silence in the car seemed deafening. My mind was racing, torn between the need to confront James and the fear of what the conversation would bring. I felt a strange sense of detachment, like I was watching myself from the outside, trying to navigate a storm I had no control over. When I pulled into the driveway, I could see the lights on inside, but the house felt cold. It didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place I no longer recognized, a place where everything had shifted in a way I couldn't undo. I sat in the car for a few moments. I could feel my heart cracking piece by piece. How could she say that? How could she talk about it like it was some innocent accident, some mistake that just happened? How could she sit there and tell me that the man I had built my life with, the man I trusted, the man I loved, had betrayed me? My thoughts were racing, and yet nothing made sense. Nothing felt real. I took a deep breath, trying to hold back the tears that were threatening to spill. "Did you even think about what this would do to me? To Aaron? To the whole family?" My words came out sharp, cutting through the air, but they felt hollow. The anger that had been building inside me had finally broken free. But there was something else too. An emptiness that made the anger feel insignificant. Rachel stepped back, her face pale. "I never wanted to hurt you," she whispered. "I didn't know how to stop it. Just happened. I'm so sorry." I shook my head, unable to process what she was saying. How could she be sorry now? After everything? My mind kept going back to the moment I saw them together, James and Rachel sitting so close, the intimacy between them so obvious. I felt betrayed by both of them, but I also felt something else creeping in. A sadness that I couldn't escape. The woman I had trusted, the daughter-in-law I had welcomed into my home, had become the person who shattered everything I had worked for. And James, my husband, the one man I thought I could always rely on, had fallen into the same trap. "I need to talk to him," I said, my voice shaky but firm. I turned to leave, not knowing what I would say, but knowing I couldn't just stand there anymore. Staring at the front door, taking slow, measured breaths. There was no turning back. I walked inside, and there he was, sitting in the living room watching television. He didn't even look up when I entered, as if everything were still normal. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my courage. This man, this stranger in front of me, was supposed to be my partner, my husband. He was supposed to be the one I could count on, the one who would stand by me no matter what. But now I don't know who he is anymore. James, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. We need to talk. His head snapped up, his expression changing from casual indifference to a tense alertness. About what? About Rachel, I replied, my eyes not leaving his face. I know what's been going on. His face paled, and for a moment he looked like he was about to say something, but then he just stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the realization that the truth had finally come out. But still he said nothing. You've been lying to me, I continued, my voice shaking now with a mixture of anger and hurt. I don't know how long this has been going on, but I know it has. And I want to know why. Why, James? After all these years, why would you do this to me? His eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape, but there was none. I had trapped him at this moment. The man who had promised to love me, to be faithful to me, had broken that vow, and I needed him to answer for it. I need to talk to him, I said, my voice shaky but firm. I turned to leave, not knowing what I would say, but knowing I couldn't just stand there anymore. Staring at the front door, taking slow, measured breaths. There was no turning back. I walked inside, and there he was, sitting in the living room watching television. He didn't even look up when I entered, as if everything were still normal. I stood in the doorway for a moment, gathering my courage. This man, this stranger in front of me, was supposed to be my partner, my husband. He was supposed to be the one I could count on, the one who would stand by me no matter what. But now I don't know who he is anymore. James, I said, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. We need to talk. His head snapped up, his expression changing from casual indifference to a tense alertness. About what? About Rachel, I replied, my eyes not leaving his face. I know what's been going on. His face paled, and for a moment he looked like he was about to say something, but then he just stopped. The silence that followed was suffocating. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the realization that the truth had finally come out, but still he said nothing. You've been lying to me, I continued, my voice shaking now with a mixture of anger and hurt. I don't know how long this has been going on, but I know it has. And I want to know why. Why, James? After all these years, why would you do this to me? His eyes darted around the room, as if looking for an escape, but there was none. I had trapped him at this moment. The man who had promised to love me, to be faithful to me, had broken that vow, and I needed him to answer for it. I'm sorry, he said finally, but the words felt empty. It wasn't supposed to happen. I never meant to hurt you. It just did. You never meant to hurt me? I echoed, my voice rising in disbelief. Is that what you think? That this was an accident? James sighed and rubbed his hands over his face. It wasn't planned. It wasn't like I went into this wanting to betray you. But things got complicated. I don't know how to explain it. I didn't want to hurt you, but I did. I know I did. You hurt me more than you could ever understand, I whispered, the weight of his words sinking in. I was no longer angry. Now I was just broken. Broken in a way that I couldn't fix with a simple apology. I stood there for what felt like an eternity, trying to hold on to the pieces of my heart, trying to hold on to the idea of us. But I knew deep down that this was the moment everything changed. There was no going back from this. The trust we had built over all these years had been shattered in a single moment, and I wasn't sure if it could ever be repaired. The silence between James and me stretched on for what felt like an eternity. His apology echoed in my mind, but it was hollow. I didn't want to hear the words anymore. I didn't want to hear how it just happened, how he didn't mean to hurt me. His words were empty promises now. They meant nothing after everything I had learned, after everything I had seen. I had been living a lie, and there was no way to go back. Why Rachel? I finally asked, my voice quieter now, almost too tired to hold the weight of the anger that was bubbling beneath the surface. Why her of all people? James shifted in his seat, looking anywhere but at me. I could tell that the guilt was overwhelming him. But guilt wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to erase the hurt, to erase the betrayal. I needed answers, real answers. I needed him to face me, to face what he had done. I don't know, he said finally, his voice strained. I didn't mean for it to happen. I didn't want this mess. But it's too late now. It happened and there's no going back. I've hurt you and I know that. Do you even care about me anymore? I asked before I could stop myself. The question hung in the air, and for a brief moment I regretted asking it. But the truth was I needed to know. I needed to know if there was still any love left between us, or if I was just a memory he was trying to forget. James didn't answer right away. Instead, he just stared at the floor, as if the answer was something too painful to say out loud. The longer he remained silent, the more I realized that maybe, just maybe, the love I thought we had was no longer there. Maybe he had already moved on. Maybe I had been living in a fantasy, holding on to something that was long gone. I don't know, he said after a long pause. I'm not sure anymore. I don't know if I can fix this. And just like that, the foundation of everything we had built began to crumble. Those words, that simple, honest confession, stung more than any lie could have. It wasn't just that he had betrayed me. It was that he had already given up. He had already decided that whatever we had was no longer worth saving. That was the hardest part to swallow. I've given you everything, I said, feeling the tears welling up, though I was still holding them back. I've given you my love, my trust, and my loyalty. And this is how you repay me. I never wanted to hurt you, but I did, he said again, and this time I saw the tears in his eyes. I don't know how we got here. I don't know how to fix it. But it wasn't just up to him anymore. It wasn't up to me to fix everything, to pretend like everything was fine when I knew it wasn't. I had spent so many years trying to hold things together, trying to keep the peace, but now I was standing at a crossroads, staring at a man who didn't know how to love me anymore. And in that moment I realized something important. Maybe it wasn't just James who had changed. Maybe I had changed too. The realization hit me like a wave, crashing against everything I had believed in. Maybe I wasn't just angry at James anymore. Maybe I was angry at myself too. I had spent so many years turning a blind eye to the cracks, convincing myself that everything would be okay, that love was enough to fix everything. But it wasn't. Love wasn't enough when trust was shattered, when the very foundation of a relationship was built on lies. I stood there, staring at James, my emotions swirling around me, hurt, disappointment, betrayal. And then, something unexpected happened. I didn't feel the anger I thought I would feel. Instead, I felt numb. I felt like I had been running on fumes for years, trying to keep up with a life that no longer made sense. The man I had spent decades with, the man I had given everything to, had turned into someone I didn't recognize. And in that moment, I realized something painful. Maybe I had been ignoring the truth for too long. Maybe I had allowed myself to believe in something that was never real. The tears I had been holding back finally fell. But they weren't just tears of sorrow, they were tears of release. The weight that had been crushing me for so long was finally starting to lift. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew I couldn't keep living in the past. I couldn't keep pretending that everything was okay when it wasn't. I stood there in the stillness of the room, the tears streaming down my face, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I allowed myself to feel everything. The pain, the heartbreak, the betrayal. It all crashed over me like a tidal wave. But amidst all that, there was something else too. A strange sense of clarity. I realized that I had been holding on to something for so long that was no longer there. I had been holding on to a version of my marriage, a version of James that didn't exist anymore. The man I thought I knew had been gone for a long time, and it was time for me to let go of the image I had built in my mind. James stood in front of me, his eyes full of regret, but regret wasn't enough. It wasn't enough to fix what he had done. It wasn't enough to undo the years of trust that had been broken. And yet, even as I stood there, feeling the weight of everything, I didn't know what to do next. I didn't know what came after this moment of realization. "You don't get to keep apologizing, James," I said, my voice steady but cold. "You've done this, and now it's time to face the consequences. I don't know if I can ever trust you again. I don't know if I can even look at you the same way." The words felt like a weight being lifted off my chest. I didn't know if I meant them, or if I was just saying them to protect myself from the truth. But they felt like the right words to say. The silence that followed was deafening, and for a moment, I wondered if I had made a mistake. But then the truth settled in, the truth that we had been drifting apart for a long time, even before Rachel came into the picture. The truth is that, somewhere along the way, we had both lost sight of each other. I never wanted to hurt you, he said again, but his voice lacked the conviction it once had. I don't know what happened to us. I shook my head. Maybe we stopped being us a long time ago, James. Maybe we've been pretending to be something we're not. You've been gone long before you ever physically left. James stared at me, his face full of regret, but it didn't matter anymore. I had spent so many years trying to hold on to something that was slipping through my fingers. And now, standing here, I realized that maybe it was time to let go. Maybe it was time to stop fighting for something that wasn't worth saving. I need space, James, I said quietly, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I can't do this right now. I can't be here pretending that everything is okay when I know it's not. I need to figure out what comes next for me. His face fell, and for the first time I saw the vulnerability in him. But it didn't matter. Vulnerability didn't erase betrayal. It didn't erase the hurt he had caused. He took a step toward me, his hand outstretched, but I pulled back. I couldn't let him touch me, not like this. Not when everything felt so broken. I'm sorry, he repeated, but the words were hollow. I had heard them too many times before, and they had lost their meaning. I don't know what else to say. I took a deep breath, wiping my eyes as I gathered myself. It's not about what you say, James. It's about what you've done. And I don't know if I can ever forgive you for this. There was a long pause, and then he whispered, I don't know if I can forgive myself either. I didn't know how to respond to that. How could I? There was no easy answer, no way to make everything better again. The damage had been done, and there was no going back. I felt a deep sadness, a mourning for the marriage that we once had, for the family that we once were. But in the back of my mind, I knew something else too. Maybe this wasn't the end. Maybe it was just the beginning of something new. I don't know what happens now, I said, my voice soft but firm. But I need time. I need to figure out what's best for me. And I can't do that with you here. James didn't argue. He didn't try to stop me. He just nodded, his face a mixture of guilt and sorrow. And in that moment, I knew that we were both standing at the edge of something we couldn't undo. The love we once shared was gone. And now all we had left was the painful process of figuring out how to move on. The next few days were a blur of emotions. I stayed at my sister's house for a while, needing distance, needing to breathe without the weight of everything hanging over me. James tried calling, but I couldn't bring myself to answer. What could he possibly say to me now that would make a difference? The hurt was still fresh, and my mind was consumed by the vision of him with Rachel. How had everything become so tangled? How had I allowed myself to stay in a marriage that had been hollow for so long? My sister, always the voice of reason, did her best to comfort me, but the truth was I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The house I had lived in for so many years felt foreign to me now. It wasn't the place where I had raised my children, where I had laughed and cried with James. It had become a symbol of everything that had gone wrong. Every corner of that house seemed to carry memories of a life that was no longer mine. I found myself thinking about the early days of our marriage. How full of hope I had been, how everything had seemed so perfect. I thought about the promises we had made to each other, and the dreams we had shared. And now it all seemed like a lie. How had we gotten here? Had we always been drifting apart and I was just too blind to see it? Or had something happened along the way that I couldn't fix? I couldn't stop thinking about Aaron, my son. What would he think when he found out? How would he react? The thought of telling him made my heart ache. He had always been so trusting, so full of love. He didn't deserve to be dragged into this mess. He didn't deserve to have his world shattered either. But I knew I couldn't keep this from him forever. He deserved the truth, even if it would hurt him. I tried to focus on myself for the first time in a long while. I spent more time with my friends, getting lost in conversations and distractions. But no matter how much I tried to push everything out of my mind, I couldn't escape the feeling of loss. I had lost my husband, my trust, and my sense of security, and I didn't know how to rebuild any of it. James continued to reach out, sending texts and leaving voicemails. I didn't respond. What could I possibly say to him? I wasn't ready to face him, to hear his excuses or apologies. I didn't need to hear how sorry he was anymore. I needed to heal, and I couldn't do that by holding on to the past. Each day that passed, I began to feel a little stronger, a little more sure of what I needed. But I also felt the weight of the uncertainty hanging over me. I didn't know what came next. I didn't know if James and I could ever fix what had been broken. But I was starting to realize that the future didn't have to be defined by the past. It was mine to choose. The days turned into weeks, and with each passing day, I began to feel the heavy weight of my decision. There were moments of peace, fleeting moments when I could almost forget the hurt, but then something would remind me of it. The way the silence in the house felt different. How I would catch myself looking at James' old chair at the dinner table and remembering the times when we used to laugh together. The absence of all that warmth was a constant reminder of what I had lost. I hadn't spoken to James since that night, and each day without him felt like a small victory and a painful defeat at the same time. I still hadn't told Aaron. I wasn't sure how to break the news to him, how to explain that the man he had looked up to had broken something in our family that couldn't be easily fixed. The thought of seeing the disappointment in his eyes, the hurt, made my stomach turn. He deserved so much better than this. One evening as I was sitting in the kitchen, the phone rang. I stared at it for a moment before picking it up. It was James. I hadn't heard his voice in what felt like forever. My heart beat faster as I pressed the phone to my ear, unsure of what to expect. "Hi," he said softly, his voice broken and weary. "I don't know what I'm doing anymore, but I need to see you. Please. I need to talk." I sat there in silence, unsure of how to respond. The truth was, I didn't know what to say to him either. Everything I thought I knew about our marriage, about our life together, had been shattered. The trust had been broken, and no apology could take that back. "I don't think it matters anymore," I replied, my voice shaking despite my attempts to stay strong. "You've already said everything you needed to say. There's nothing more you can say to fix this." "I know," he answered, his voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect you to forgive me, but I need you to know that I am so sorry. I don't know how to fix this, but I want to try. I can't lose you." I closed my eyes, fighting the tears that were threatening to fall. I wasn't sure what I wanted anymore. The hurt was still so fresh, and the idea of forgiving him felt impossible. But part of me still wanted to believe that we could find our way back. "I don't know if I can come back from this, James," I said quietly. "I don't know if I can ever look at you the same way again." "I understand," he replied, his voice full of regret. "I don't know what the future holds, but I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry for everything. And I'll be here when you're ready, even if it's never." I didn't answer. The truth was, I wasn't ready. I wasn't ready to forgive him, and I wasn't sure if I ever would be. But at that moment I knew something important. I was starting to move on. I didn't have all the answers, but I was beginning to accept that I couldn't hold on to the past forever. The future, whatever it looked like, was mine to shape. The days after my conversation with James were quiet. Too quiet. I found myself going through the motions, trying to rebuild a sense of normalcy, but it wasn't the same. Nothing was the same anymore. I had spent so many years focused on keeping my family together. But now I was faced with the harsh reality that maybe some things couldn't be fixed. The love I had once shared with James felt distant, as if it belonged to someone else. And the future I had imagined, the one where everything would eventually fall into place, seemed uncertain. I didn't know what to do with myself. My thoughts were scattered, and the weight of the betrayal still pressed heavily on my chest. But something had shifted in me. The woman I was before, the one who would blindly forgive, the one who would turn a blind eye to the cracks, was gone. I had to find a new version of myself. One that was strong, independent, and capable of moving forward, even if it meant doing so without James by my side. The first step was finding peace. I spent time reflecting on everything that had happened, allowing myself to grieve but also allowing myself to heal. I realized that I didn't need James' forgiveness to move on. I needed my own. I needed to forgive myself for the years I had spent holding on to a dream that wasn't real, for the trust one had given to someone who had betrayed me. It was time to let go of the anger and the resentment, not for his sake but for mine. I started focusing on the things that brought me joy. I spent time with my friends, reconnected with old hobbies, and allowed myself to dream again. For so long I had lived for my family, for James, for Aaron. But now I have to live for myself. I had to remember who I was before all of this, the woman who had dreams and aspirations beyond being a wife and mother. And then there was Aaron. He deserved the truth, no matter how painful it was. I couldn't keep this secret from him any longer. It was time to sit him down and tell him everything. The thought terrified me. I didn't know how to explain to him that his father, the man he had looked up to, had betrayed the very foundation of our family. But I knew it was something I had to do. He deserved to know the truth just as much as I did. I sat in silence for a while, staring out the window, trying to gather the strength to make the call. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized that this was not just about James and Rachel. It was about my family. It was about me being honest with the people I loved. It was about giving Aaron the opportunity to process the truth in his own way, no matter how painful it would be. It was time to stop hiding from the reality of what had happened. I had spent so long running from it, pretending like everything was fine, but now, I had to face it. I had to face my son, my family, and most importantly, I had to face myself. That evening I called Aaron. He was at his apartment, his voice light and cheerful when he picked up. A stark contrast to what I was feeling. I took a deep breath before speaking, unsure of where to start. "Aaron, can you come over for a bit? There's something I need to talk to you about." He hesitated for a moment, sensing the seriousness in my voice. "Of course, Mom. I'll be there in 15 minutes. When he arrived, he immediately noticed the change in the air. The weight of everything seemed to settle between us, unspoken but undeniable. I could tell that he was trying to gauge my mood, trying to figure out what had happened. "Is everything okay?" he asked, concern creeping into his voice. I shook my head. "No, Aaron. Everything is not okay. There's something I need to tell you. Something that's been eating away at me." He sat down across from me, his eyes searching mine. I could feel the tension in the room, the knot in my stomach tightening with every passing second. "What's going on, Mom?" he asked gently. "You're scaring me." I took a moment, gathering my thoughts, wondering how to say it without causing him pain. But I realized there was no easy way. There was no way to sugarcoat the truth. "Aaron," I began, my voice breaking. "Your father, he's been seeing Rachel. It's been going on for a while and I found out about it. He's been lying to me and it's destroyed everything." The words felt like they were tearing me apart, but they had to be said. Aaron stared at me, his expression unreadable. It was as if the world had stopped moving, and I could hear the deafening silence in my mind. "Are you sure?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I'm sure," I replied, my eyes brimming with tears. "I saw them together. I confronted your father, and he admitted everything." Aaron didn't say anything for a long time. His face was a mixture of shock, disbelief, and yes, anger. His fists clenched in his lap, and I could see him processing the news, trying to make sense of it all. "Why?" he finally asked, his voice cracking. "Why would he do that? Why Rachel?" "I don't know, sweetheart," I answered, my voice trembling. I wish I had answers. But sometimes people make choices that we can't understand, no matter how hard we try. His eyes were filled with confusion and pain. "Mama, I don't know what to say. This is so messed up." I reached across the table and took his hand, trying to offer him some comfort, but I could feel my own heart breaking. "I know, honey. I know. I don't have the answers either. But I'm here for you always. And we're going to get through this together." There was a long pause as Aaron absorbed the weight of what I had told him. Finally, he nodded, but I could see the anger building inside him. "I don't want to talk to him," he muttered. "Not yet." "I understand," I said softly. "Take all the time you need." For the first time in weeks, I felt a slight sense of relief. It wasn't the relief of knowing everything was okay. Far from it. But it was the relief of finally telling someone, of not carrying the burden of the secret anymore. And as I looked at my son, I realized something important. He wasn't the little boy I used to protect. He was an adult now, and he had his own emotions and his own way of processing pain. It was time for both of us to heal together in our own way. The next few days were a quiet kind of chaos. I didn't know how to navigate this new reality, but I was doing it one step at a time. Aaron withdrew into himself, spending more time at his apartment, avoiding his father's calls. I didn't pressure him to talk more than he was ready to. I could see the pain in his eyes, and I knew that the betrayal had cut him deep. It wasn't just about me. It was about the family he had always looked to for stability, the foundation that had been cracked in ways I never imagined. As for me, I spent more time at home, though it no longer felt like the place it used to be. The walls felt like they were closing in on me, reminding me of the life I once had, of the love that had been replaced by betrayal. But something was changing. Slowly but surely, I was starting to feel something other than pain. I was starting to feel the first faint stirrings of independence. It wasn't easy. There were moments when I still broke down, moments when I thought I couldn't move on. But I kept reminding myself that this wasn't the end. It was just a new chapter, one I never asked for but one I had to write. James tried to reach out to me, but I kept my distance. I knew that I couldn't make a decision about him right now. Not while I was still reeling from the shock of it all. He had apologized again and again, but the words were starting to lose their weight. Apologies didn't fix broken trust. They didn't bring back the years of shared memories, the moments of love and care that had been tainted by his choices. But the longer I kept my distance, the more I realized that I wasn't just distancing myself from him. I was distancing myself from the version of me that had been willing to overlook the cracks, the version of me that had clung to hope even when I knew deep down that something was wrong. I was letting go of that woman, and while it was painful, it was also freeing. It was like I was shedding a skin I no longer needed. I still didn't know what the future held, but I knew this much. I had to be okay with whatever came next. I had to stop waiting for James to fix things, to wait for him to prove himself worthy of my trust again. I had to fix myself first. I had to stop relying on someone else to define my worth. And for the first time in a long time, I started thinking about my own dreams, my own desires, things I had pushed aside for so many years. I started taking long walks in the park just to clear my mind. I picked up hobbies I had abandoned, things that made me feel connected to myself again. I reached out to old friends, letting them into my life again. It felt good to laugh, to remember what it felt like to enjoy life outside of the pain. I wasn't fully healed. Not yet. But I was on my way. And that was enough for now. As the weeks passed, I found myself reflecting more on what it meant to truly move forward. I spent less time dwelling on the past and more time building the future, even if that future was still unclear. One thing became increasingly evident. I had allowed myself to be consumed by the past for so long that I had forgotten what it felt like to live for myself. I had been so focused on holding everything together, trying to make everyone happy, that I had neglected my own happiness. I started making small changes. I enrolled in a photography class, something I had always wanted to do but never had the time for. I spent more time in nature, walking for hours, letting the fresh air clear my mind. I reached out to a therapist, someone who could help me make sense of all the emotions I was struggling with. The process wasn't easy, but it was necessary. I knew that healing didn't happen overnight. It took time, patience, and the willingness to face the truth, no matter how difficult it was. In the meantime, James continued to reach out. He asked if we could meet, if we could talk about everything that had happened. Part of me wanted to, but another part of me knew that it wasn't the right time. I couldn't sit down with him and pretend that everything was okay. I needed more time to process everything, to figure out what I truly wanted. One evening, Aaron called me. His voice was steady, but there was an underlying sadness to it. "Mom," he said, "I think it's time I talk to Dad." The words caught me off guard, and for a moment, I didn't know what to say. Aaron had been avoiding James for weeks, still angry and hurt by the betrayal. But now he was ready to face his father, to confront the pain, and maybe, just maybe, begin the process of healing. "I think that's a good idea, Aaron," I replied softly. "But you don't have to do it for anyone else. Do it for yourself when you're ready." "I am ready," he said, his voice firm. "It's not going to be easy, but I need to hear him out. I need to know what he has to say." That conversation marked a turning point for Aaron. He was no longer a child looking for answers from his parents. He was a man confronting the truth and deciding how to move forward. I could see him beginning to take control of his own healing, just as I had started to take control of mine. The next day, Aaron and James sat down to talk. I wasn't present, but I knew that whatever happened in that conversation would be pivotal. It wasn't just about their relationship. It was about breaking the silence, about airing the hurt and moving forward with honesty. I didn't know what the outcome would be, but I felt a sense of peace knowing that Aaron was ready to face his father, to take that first step toward understanding and maybe even forgiveness. As for me, I continued my journey. It wasn't always easy. And there were days when I found myself questioning everything, wondering if I would ever fully heal. But I also knew that I had started something. I had started reclaiming my own life, my own joy, and my own future. And that, in itself, was a victory. A few months passed, and I found myself in a place I never thought I would be, at peace. It wasn't the kind of peace that comes with forgetting the past or erasing the pain. It was the kind of peace that comes from acceptance. I had accepted that the person I once was had to let go of the past to move forward. I had to forgive myself for not seeing the cracks sooner, for not acting faster, and for allowing the situation to get as far as it did. But I had also learned that healing wasn't a linear path. Some days were better than others, and some days were filled with sadness, but I kept moving forward, one small step at a time. Aaron and James' relationship was still complicated. They had a long road ahead of them, but they were talking. Aaron was no longer avoiding his father. They had moments of awkwardness and of uncertainty, but the foundation of their bond was still there, and that gave me hope. Hope that things could be rebuilt, even if they would never be the same as they once were. As for James and me, I still didn't know where we stood. There were moments when I thought about the possibility of rebuilding our relationship, but there were other moments when I realized that some things were beyond repair. I didn't want to hold on to something just because it was familiar. I wanted to hold on to something that was real, something that was built on trust and mutual respect. And right now, that wasn't possible with James. He still reached out, but I had learned not to feel obligated to answer. I was learning to live for myself. The truth was, I didn't need his apology anymore. What I needed was to move on, to focus on building the life I deserved. I had started to go back to the things I loved, to find joy in my own company, and to learn what it meant to be happy again without needing anyone else to define that happiness for me. I also started to think about the future differently. I didn't need a partner to feel whole. I didn't need validation from anyone else. I could be whole on my own. And if love came again, it would come from a place of strength, not need. I wasn't looking for someone to fill the emptiness I had felt for so long. I was looking for someone who would share in the fullness of life, someone who would walk beside me, not try to complete me. In the end, the lesson I learned wasn't just about forgiveness or betrayal. It was about finding the strength to let go of what no longer served me. It was about reclaiming my own life and remembering who I was before all the hurt. And though the journey was painful, it was also one of the most transformative experiences of my life. I didn't have all the answers, but I had something better. Peace, a peace that came from knowing I had the power to heal, to move on, and to choose the life I wanted. Looking back, it's hard to believe how far I've come since that day. The day I found out the truth about James and Rachel. At the time, it felt like the world had crumbled beneath me. The life I had built with my husband and the family I had raised all seemed like a distant memory, a dream that had evaporated overnight. But now, as I reflect on everything that's happened, I realize that day wasn't the end of my story. It was just the beginning. It's strange how life works, isn't it? Sometimes we find ourselves at the lowest points, convinced that there's no way out, no way forward. But slowly we begin to rebuild. We take those small, painful steps, one after another, until we're standing on solid ground again. We find our strength not in the absence of pain, but in the way we rise above it. I had always thought that love was about sacrifice, about holding on no matter what. But I've come to understand that love also means knowing when to let go. Letting go of the things and people that no longer serve us, no longer bring us peace. And in that space we find room to grow, room to heal, and room to become the person we were always meant to be. I've learned that healing isn't a straight path. It's full of twists and turns, highs and lows. There are days when the pain feels fresh, when the memories flood in and I wonder if I'll ever truly move on. But then there are days when I feel lighter, when I realize that the woman I was before no longer defines me. I am not defined by the mistakes of others or by the pain I've endured. I am defined by how I rise, how I choose to heal, and how I choose to love myself despite everything. Think of Aaron too. Watching him grow and navigate his own healing process has reminded me that we all have the ability to move forward, even when it feels impossible. The pain of betrayal doesn't define us. It's what we do with that pain that shapes who we become. It's how we allow it to transform us, to teach us, to strengthen us. And as for James, I've realized that I don't need his approval or his love to validate my worth. I don't need to wait for him to make things right. I've learned that I am enough on my own. I am worthy of love, of peace, of happiness, not because of anyone else, but because I've learned to love myself again. In the end, this journey wasn't just about betrayal or heartbreak. It was about finding my own voice, reclaiming my power, and embracing the life that was waiting for me. And that, I've learned, is the true meaning of healing. Have you ever experienced a moment where everything you thought you knew came crashing down? A moment that shook you to your core, yet led to your greatest growth? Share your story with us. We all have moments of heartbreak and healing, but it's how we rise from them that truly defines us. If this story resonated with you, don't forget to like, comment, and share. Your voice matters, and you never know how your experience might help someone else who is going through something similar. Subscribe for more stories of strength, healing, and hope, and join a community where we uplift each other in our journeys of transformation. Remember, you are never alone in your struggle, and every step forward, no matter how small, is a step toward your own healing.